We'd love for you to jump in as well.
Yeah, so to answer the question as well, when I started NFTs, I was really looking for anyone that maybe looked like me, or were like from diversity, or were like, any diversity I could find, and any art style that looked like me. I will like really like stalk them and look at everything they were doing, and there was really a few of them, really really minimal. And so I felt like it needed to change a lot. So that's when I discovered a lot of community, like Linda said, like the African community, that vintage funded, the Black NFT art, and even the Asian community, any community of the diversity. It was really, really beautiful to see them grow, and I saw that it helped tremendously get onboarding new artists, because they felt seen, and they will have like examples to follow. My art is all about representation, because when I was growing up, I knew I wanted to be an artist. But when I would go to museum, especially in France, in museum it's all like white male painters that are
100%, yeah.
yeah. And I felt like I belonged there, but at the same time I didn't, because I wouldn't see like any like example of someone that looked um, a little bit like me. The only one that I was seeing was Frida Kahlo. So if you look at my art, you see a lot of inspiration from her, and that's why in my art you see lots of diversity, and I really want to include any ethnicity. And when I launched the Mona Lana, I tried my best to be really really inclusive with the skin tones, with the hair types. So a lot of this is a lot of the representation you can see in my work, and it helps lots of new collectors, a lot of women collectors to get into NFTs. I received tons of DMs from women telling me, "Oh, the Mona Lana is my first NFT," and when I saw it, I felt seen, and then I understood, and I made more research about the blockchain and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely extremely important to feel seen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so true in terms of thinking about onboarding people in this space. Is it has to feel accessible. You have to see yourself in it. I've been in sort of the Silicon Valley tech scene for over a decade, and know a lot of people who are early in crypto. And I did not get into crypto because of it did not feel like those were my people, for lack of a better word, or it did not feel like I was the kind of person who was welcome in those circles. This, maybe as silly as that sounds, but you do sort of find your folks. And by finding those people, and Ali is actually the person who brought me into the NFT scene. And then from there, I found this incredible subculture. And maybe it's not just a subculture, just a part of the culture. I shouldn't even think of it as a subculture of people who have similar values and incredibly diverse communities, or diversifying. We still have a lot of work to do, obviously, and representation as well. We're our collection, the Meta Angels collection. We really intentionally wanted it to be sort of human versus any sort of like imaginary or sort of animal or cartoony type of image. But we also wanted to have the full gender spectrum and the full racial spectrum. And it's been an incredible artistic challenge, but also so much fun to have a single base create essentially all of humanity, and have people be able to find themselves is really our goal, no matter who they are. We're going to shift over. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to shift over to a little bit of the collector's perspective, and then we have some questions from the audience we'll be pulling up. But Lizzie, jumping back over to you. So you run social at OpenSea. You're an artist yourself. How do you think, and you and Alex, what do you look for in identifying artists to promote, and how do you discover new talent?
So I love this question because it really reminds me of why I got excited about being in this position. One of the things that I think is really important is being able to uplift and highlight like the masses, right? There are so many people that gravitate towards OpenSea, and like that just means there's a whole bunch of new art to see. And I think that it becomes hard to be like, oh, I'm going to specifically go somewhere to find something. And I think one of the easiest things is being able to almost do like a call to action, where it's like, hey, like show us your work, and then I get to do this deep dive into a bunch of people who come across like that messaging and are like, okay, I want to be able to showcase my art. And there's actively someone that's there watching and trying to pull from all these new spaces, because I think that every day there's a new person that joins, every week, every month, right? So a lot of the times, there's a discourse where it's like, well, I've only been here for so long, and it's hard for me to find a community. It's hard for me to be able to get people to know who I am just yet. But when they come across a tweet that's like, hey, show me your work, they're like, okay, this is an opportunity to show everyone, right, their work. These threads turn into somewhat of a gallery sometimes. I find that a lot of people say like, hey, like I find a lot of new art just based off of going through these little like these tweets or these threads. Like I actually find new ways of finding new artists. And I think that that's something that I also end up being able to do, like finding people that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to tap into if not for a thread that said, hey, like show me your work, let me be able to find it. And I think one of the interesting things is that it's almost like a training day type of thing, a situation where when we first got into doing that, a lot of people would just like send their work, and it would just be an image, or it would just be an image of their work. And I'm like, okay, well, okay, I'll navigate, I'll click on their profile. And because a lot of people are new, I think that there is like a harder understanding of making sure that your presence is like actively 100% complete. And what I mean by that is in terms of like having your link in bio up to date, having a link to actually be able to find where your work is on different platforms. So I ended up getting into a roadblock where if I'm trying to like, oh, this is an amazing piece, let me go find it, I now don't have the opportunity to find the work because things are a little bit incomplete. So there was this space of having to try to like teach people how to make sure that when you are sharing your work, you're giving the whole information, right? You're showing your work, you're giving the link so that there's that direct opportunity for people, even not just me, but like people who potentially will come across that tweet to actually just go straight into being able to actually find it on OpenSea. So it's a process of being able to just get pull from a lot of people so that we can uplift a bunch of different people. I'm talking about women, men, transgenders, queer, like everybody from different walks of the planet. I think it's important that we show art from everywhere because there is art everywhere. And it's not just in the United States. It's not just in Canada. There's art everywhere. So it's important that we show people that, hey, if you can see this work and it's from somewhere else, that you can do it too. And I think that's why that statement of representation matters, because if you don't see other people from different places being like showcased, then you almost feel like that's not something that I can do. Whereas if we are trying our best to showcase different people's work and different art like types, genres, like everything and anything, then people have that like mindset that it's not just PFPs in this or like specific art in this space that can be successful. There can be so many things. And I think that's just my dedication of really uplifting and showcasing like independent artists, because I myself am an independent artist. So yeah, that's just a bunch of that in a ball.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And it's, I mean, for any artists listening in, I'm just going to recap the big tips here, which is one, make sure your bios are up to date and people can find your work. Really important. If people love it, let them find you. And the second thing is that there are invitations to share. And I love that you do that, Lizzie. And I've seen a lot of sort of individuals do that as well. I think that invitation is particularly important for underrepresented groups because it might not be as natural either personality wise or culturally, or not feel as natural because you're new to the space to say, hey, here's my work, right? Come find me. But when someone invites you, share what you're working on. Or I love when people ask, please drop your link if you've never sold a piece before, if you're new to the space. I think it gives an opportunity for people to feel comfortable putting themselves out there, and that leads to so much fun discovery. I'd love to, the last piece of this before we get to the questions, Linda, you also, in addition to being an artist or a curator, how have you discovered a lot of the artists that you elevate through your art collective, Cyberbot?
Thank you so much. That's a really good question because I basically started Cyberbot as a community of artists of African descent in the metaverse. One thing I saw that was clear is that there were very talented artists whose floor was criminally low compared to the quality they were bringing to the table, and sometimes compared to sort of their track record and who they had worked had sort of their career prior to the NFT space. And so the idea was to sort of put a communication and a curation, some curation and communication power behind them to sort of try to raise their floors. It was very organic, to be honest. I think having worked in tech and sort of knowing a little bit how Twitter works was very helpful in sort of figuring out how to use the search engine to find people in the beginning, and especially women, men of color, people who didn't identify, who identified as gender non-binary. So there's a lot of sort of ways you can sort of start to search NFT Twitter to find people. And at first it was very much sort of organic, the people who I was meeting through the communities I was a part of. And then also eventually I had to be intentional about doing research on, okay, I don't see enough women on my feed. Why don't I see enough Black women on my feed? And sort of putting, muting certain accounts and putting alerts on other accounts to start to sort of basically be regularly fed more of the identities that I was looking for the collective. And that's sort of how it happened. It was at first organic and then very much intentional about curating the feed itself to make sure I wasn't seeing the sort of default NFT Twitter and seeing the people I was actually interested in following. And eventually we started to talk to each other. And one of the great things that happened is that each of us sort of forms connections with other artists, whether we have kinship because we come from the same country, or because we have the same style of art. And what happened once Cyberbot started is that artists would bring in other artists. Like they would, for example, suggest, oh, I think this artist would be really good for the collective. I love the way they work. And one thing we also make sure we have in common in this in the collective is that every artist is not just sort of working. Not that it's there's anything wrong with that, but artists are sort of motivated by more than commercial ends. So they do a lot of work to uplift the community or to share messages that essentially bring more value to our community in general, or share a new story of Africa or a different story of Africa that is not necessarily seen or heard of in the space enough. So that's sort of one thing we look out for as well. So making sure that they're bringing more to the table than just sort of wanting to sell their work, which I think there's nothing wrong. Again, there's nothing wrong about that. But for our collective, it's very important as Africans that we are showing the diversity of sort of the African stories, and we're bringing sort of as much authenticity as possible. Because if you contrast that with the traditional art world, everything you see coming out of the continent has been carefully vetted and sort of, curated by people who are potentially not necessarily knowledgeable about the continent.
It's filtered,
or not
100%.
from the continent, yeah. Right? And we're trying to change that. So we're trying to be as authentic and as diverse in our representation of this gigantic continent. And so one of the things we strive to do as much as possible is to sort of make sure the identities of the collectives keep representing this diversity over time.
Well, thank you so much. We could talk about this for another hour, but we have about, a little under 10 minutes left. So I want to switch over. We've got a couple of questions that have come in from the community. Max has teed up a few speakers whose questions were selected, and it's going to give them the floor, and then we'll wrap it up near the end. And obviously, if any of the speakers want to jump in, just jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So Kevin, I know you mentioned how exciting it is to be able to have a really unique, really close relationship with all your collectors. And along with that, obviously, comes a fair amount of risk. We've got Steph here, also known as Decade to Doodles, who's an NFT artist herself. And she's got a question about how you all as artists deal with bad actors in the space.
Yeah, it's
Steph, let me just see. It's Steph. Do we have you on here? I think there was a little more.
Yeah,
she wanted to add. Yeah,
Steph, I think you wanted to elaborate on that, right?
okay.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to. But I also think Kevin, you can probably assume where I'm going here, right? Is that I think NFTs do so much to protect artists, their value, their IP. That's something that really excited me about the space. But what also makes me a little nervous about this space is there are some bad actors. There's bots that are flipping. There's copy minting. There's undoxed influencers, and I think I'm constantly thinking of ways to kind of reconcile those two. And I certainly have my own perspective on the pros and the cons, but I'd love to hear yours or anyone else's too.
Yeah, I mean, in brief, it's scary as hell out there because, yeah, there are always wackos. So, and there's a whole spectrum of from extremely decent and surprisingly lovely people to downright scary. So because a lot of my work, I guess you could say I'm politically active, or I have a strong opinion about especially human rights. I get death threats, so that's kind of, I mean, aside from actually being physically assaulted, that's kind of the next rung down the ladder of scariness. It's kind of one of the reasons I don't like the idea of doing Discord, and you're always going to get trolled and this and that. But then there is then there are those who they buy your work, and here's this really scary thing, and I maybe as a whole, the community of artists can make a statement about this, because some people believe that it is your duty as an artist to do everything you can possibly do to pump your own work to go up in value. And this is where we get into funny situations. Now, I'm not going to blanket and say the concept of a roadmap is no good, but and for some projects it makes a lot of sense, especially when there's a social good component. But there's pressure put on artists, like actually explicit pressure. I get emails saying like, dude, why aren't you doing anything to, hype this collection or that collection? And I mean, really, kind of, it's not the norm. It's a minority of people doing this. But yeah, you expose yourself to as you say, bad actors, and so being an artist is it may not be quite the same as being on a sitcom on TV or something, but you are an extension of your work. You are a, and if it's being sold, your being is being commodified, and without any actual real life engagement with people, you still have a very intimate relationship with people, or at least some of them think you do. And so, yeah, you have to be on guard, and don't get into doxing and all of that stuff. Then, by the way, the other thing is, if you have some success, there are those who it's all there on the ledger. You can see exactly how much money you made, and it's being kept in crypto. So I get people all the time saying like, are you going to go on vacation without a security team? Stuff like that. It's real. We're living in crazy times, and so the good is amplified and the negative is amplified.
Absolutely. If any of the other speakers want to jump in, otherwise we've got one more question lined up before we'll wrap up.
Yeah, if no one else wants to chime in, we'll go ahead and hand the mic to Amelia.
Hi. Well, first of all, this has just been so wonderful to hear all of your perspectives. I was actually curious, for those of you who are artists and also do some collecting of NFTs, just like, when you are looking at other artists or other projects, what do you look for? I'm just sort of curious, like, how your perspective as an artist might set you apart from the rest of us. What can we learn from you? Like, how does that perspective affect the way that you get involved in the wider NFT space as a civilian when you're not being a creator?
I think that one's a really good one. So my he right now is from an artist. And the name escapes me, but she's an amazing artist. And I think I remember just seeing her work on my feed, and I was like, oh my God, I love the colors. I love the vibe. It gives me like this nostalgic like feeling. And then going through all her work, I was like, I just am drawn to the aesthetics that she creates. And I was like, I have to have this. And I think that is always like, resonated with me when I find a new artist that's sharing their work and they have such a story to tell just based off the visuals that they create, that there's a body of work that they created and it is just beautiful. So when I have that feeling, I tend to gravitate to wanting to own that and just have that be a part of my collection.
Any other speakers want to jump in?
I mean, I'm not an artist per se, but I would just say when I look to collect for myself, it's really important for me to get to know either the team or the artist. That's like something that really resonates with me. I want to feel like I understand their story, if not have some relationship with them. So like that's usually the advice I give to people when they're like, what should I buy next? It's like kind of like what you like based on those criteria.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things I was really excited about in the NFT space was the ability to become a collector. Because prior to that, I thought I'd have to sort of sell work for a really long time before I could purchase like my first painting. But one of the things I definitely look for is a connection from like a aesthetic standpoint. I love the work, and then I look for who's created the work. One thing I try to do as well is force myself to sort of look for women, look for Black women, look for identities that I feel sort of connected to, because I know that if I just go with the default of like what's on my feed, I might sort of end up purchasing work from people who look nothing like me for the most part, and not through a fault of my own, but because of a lack of, that's just how Twitter is in general. And another thing I do is I always try to make conversation with the person I bought art from and ask them what was the inspiration behind, because I don't know about sort of the other artists, but one of the things I love to do as a designer, as an artist, is just sort of mood boarding, like looking at work that I enjoy, work that inspires me sort of throughout the ages, and being able to sort of own a piece of that sort of inspiration is really cool. So I think I definitely think of it that way.
Could I just chime in on this? I would say, just like doubling down on like Linda, I think one of the main purposes of the African NFT community was the fact that you could get all these artists like in one place, and you could kind of know, like for me, I'm a big lover of Afrofuturism, and as an Afrofuturist, so it's kind of like cool knowing that you can collect from people that are doing the same stuff and they're like-minded. But then, for example, like if you go look at Linda's work, she's like fantastic because like she's so multidisciplinary. She's got like so much stuff. So I only found out because of her what generative art was. I didn't understand the process and everything. So like getting into that and tapping into that, and it's so cool because it gives you, should I say, it inspires you to want to work harder, because if you do earn ETH, you can go and put it back and collect from your friends. Because I don't ever believe in lowballing an artist by saying, hey, can you make it price cheaper? I just feel that I need to work harder and I need to get to that level and say, okay, cool, now I can afford this. Like in quotes, the real world, like how try and get a pair of shoes or just save up. So I would say that's probably one of the coolest aspects as well.
Yeah. And the reinvestment into the community has just been such an incredible part of this space. And whether it's, artists obviously sort of now being able to do that and invest in each other, or whether it's collectors, speaking to a collector who says, I have a few pieces from someone I really love, and I'm purposefully listing it high because I want them to get secondary sales to share with other people and then to go back and buy another piece from them. That's my goal. And so there's so many different ways to sort of reinvest in community. But I just wanted to thank everyone here for joining us in this really fantastic conversation about some of these bigger questions on the space and where it's going. Thank you to all of our panelists who are fantastic. If you don't, you're listening, you don't follow them, they all bring such a different perspective to the space. I really recommend following them on Twitter. If you want to learn more about Meta Angels, we're a community that is really focused around generosity, transparency, and accessibility, where our members help each other in real life stuff, not just the metaverse. And so you're welcome to follow us at Meta_Angels. You'll see a pinned tweet, or to join us in our Discord. Our mint is in early February. And then, we come back every week with different spaces. They're always recorded. So, this one will be recorded. You're welcome to share it with other folks. And we're excited. Thank you again to everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.